She stood on the balcony of the $4 million mansion like a queen on a stolen throne. My land, my trees, my grandfather's barn that she had bulldozed without blinking. She looked down at me like I was trespassing on her world, like I didn't exist before she decided to claim what was mine. She smiled, calm, proud, and in that smile, I saw every lie, every backdoor deal, every smug HOA vote that turned my family's legacy into her vanity project. But she didn't know I was watching her from the shadows, not to beg, not to bargain, but to take back what she thought she'd stolen for good. I didn't just get justice. I got it all back. Every acre. Every shred of her power, shattered by one legal trap she never saw coming. You're going to want to hear how it happened, because people like her don't go down easy, and sometimes you have to dig deep into history, pain, and patience too. Get the win you deserve. Watch till the end, because how this story ends will change everything you think you know about fighting back. A few years ago, I was just a guy who inherited his father's land. 20 acres. Raw, peaceful, untouched by time. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't commercial. It was home. I had dreams of turning it into a small cabin and living the kind of quiet life most people crave but never reach. I didn't want trouble. I didn't want drama. But trouble came knocking anyway, dressed in heels and holding a clipboard. I first noticed something was wrong when I drove up to the property one morning and saw red tape tied around survey flags, dozens of them, freshly hammered into the soil along my northern tree line. I thought it was a mistake, called the county office, thinking maybe it was a utility thing. But when the clerk on the line said, "Sir, your land is listed under Cedar Bluffs HOA," my stomach dropped. I wasn't part of any HOA. I drove straight into town, right into the newly constructed HOA office. It was cold and modern glass. Doors, white walls, buzzing with fake smiles and real power. That's where I met Joyce, the HOA president, the queen bee. The kind of woman who speaks softly but always makes sure someone else does the stinging. She had a pen in her hand and confidence in her eyes. I told her calmly there had been a mistake, that my land had never been part of Cedar Bluffs. I had deeds going back to the 60s to prove it. She didn't even blink. She leaned back and said, "Oh, we voted to annex surrounding lots last year. This county signed off." When I said, "You can't do that, it's private land," she smiled and said, "Not anymore." I left that office shaking. Weeks passed. I filed complaints. I sent copies of my deed to the county. No one listened. Then one morning, I arrived at my property to find my trees, my family's trees gone, all bulldozed, flattened, and in their place, a yellow cat excavator tearing through the soil like it was already claimed. When I demanded answers from the crew, they told me the HOA had authorized construction. They said I wasn't listed as the owner in their records anymore. Joyce had claimed I'd moved away years ago, that the land was abandoned. She'd forged votes, paid for a fraudulent survey. And when I showed up with my paperwork, the sheriff told me I was trespassing and would be arrested if I didn't leave. The worst part wasn't the lies or the machinery ripping up the land. It was standing there, helpless, watching them destroy the place where my father taught me to fish, where my mother grew tomatoes, where our old barn once stood. That night I sat alone on a broken stone, tears falling onto the dust. It felt like mourning a funeral I wasn't invited to, but grief didn't break me. It made me dangerous. I spent every night after that poring over records, zoning laws, maps, and dusty old filing cabinets at the courthouse. I studied until my eyes burned. Somewhere in my gut, I knew there had to be a crack in her plan. And then, one night, deep in a box of my father's old legal documents, I found it. A clause. A single paragraph in a 1986 agreement between my dad and the county. It stated that while the Cedar Bluffs HOA had rights to develop adjacent land, our parcel was specifically exempt from annexation due to a land use variance filed and approved decades ago. It was airtight, but I needed more, because Joyce had already poured concrete. Her mansion wasn't just a plan, it was half built. And her HOA friends had the county eating out of their hands. That's when I contacted Blake, a quiet but brilliant lawyer known for winning battles without ever raising his voice. I showed him the document, and he nodded slowly. "You just found your bullet," he said. "Now let's load it." We filed a quiet title action. That's a lawsuit to confirm legal ownership of land when there's a dispute. Joyce had 20 business days to respond. She didn't. She thought she didn't need to. She thought she owned me, the land and the law. 21 days passed, and with her silence, the court confirmed that the title to the land was mine and mine alone. I didn't call her. I didn't warn her. I drove straight to the site. The mansion's skeleton was already standing glass walls, exposed beams, shiny steel supports climbing toward the sky. I walked right up to the foreman and handed him the court order. "Shut it down," I said. The site fell silent. Joyce stormed out of the half-built house, screaming at me. I handed her the same paper. "You're trespassing," I said. She laughed in my face. But within the hour, the sheriff showed up again. Only this time, he was there to escort her off my property. That wasn't the end. Joyce lawyered up. The HOA sued me, claiming I had misrepresented documents, even accusing me of forging my own father's signature. But we were ready. Every signature, every map, every permit they submitted was cross-examined, and each one turned out to be riddled with fraud. Joyce's permit, invalid. The vote logs from the HOA annexation, fake. The survey, paid for by a friend. Of hers disbarred 2 years ago, it all crumbled. The judge's ruling was brutal. She declared that Joyce had not only built illegally, but had done so with intent, using deceit and committing fraud in multiple filings. The court ordered full removal of the mansion and levied restitution costs against Joyce personally. She had to pay for every brick, beam, and screw to be removed and hauled off. It took months, but one day, I returned and the land was finally clear again. Grass had started to grow where there had once been concrete. Birds chirped where there had been jackhammers. The wind felt clean again. I walked to the center where the grand staircase of her palace used to rise toward the sky, and I knelt in the dirt. I didn't feel victorious. I felt peace. Because justice isn't loud. It doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And this time, it whispered that my father's land was finally safe again. If you've ever felt powerless, someone has ever stolen from your weather, it's your land, your name, or your dignity. Know this, you are not alone. You are not helpless. There's always a way. You just have to be willing to look where no one else is looking and don't walk away. Don't ever walk away from what's yours. This story isn't over, because after I won back my land, Joyce, and the HOA came back with something worse, they weren't done. Neither was I. Watch till the end, because what they tried next nearly cost me everything. I thought it was over. The house was gone. The land was clean. The birds had returned. The grass had healed. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. I had one. Not just legally, but morally. I did everything by the book. Had the truth. The paperwork. The court on my side. I believed that justice, once served, would be final. But I was wrong. Because people like Joyce don't just lose. They plot. She wasn't going to walk away from a $4 million dream without dragging me through the fire first. And the worst part? This time, she didn't need bulldozers or blueprints. All she needed was influence in. She had plenty of that. It started quietly. A notice in my mailbox that looked like junk at first, a zoning violation, then another and another. One said my mailbox wasn't up to code. Another claimed my well was improperly registered. Then they fined me $3,200 for unpermitted use of septic infrastructure, which didn't even exist yet because I hadn't built anything. At first I laughed. It was pathetic. But then my bank froze my line of credit, my property insurance. Got flagged and dropped. Suppliers I'd lined up for building the cabin suddenly stopped returning my calls. One evening, I walked up to the land and found a giant red notice nailed to a post near the drive. Cease and desist. Illegal development under HOA review. But I wasn't under any HOA. That's when it hit me. They were using Joyce's connections, even after her downfall. The board had changed some faces, but the game was the same. They had money, ties to county staff, and a very specific plan to make my life miserable until I sold the land, till I gave up. But they underestimated one thing. I had nothing left to lose, so I took every single violation, every fine, every baseless threat, and I built a wall of documentation around it. I filed public records requests, emailed every clerk in the county, forced them to send me the original signatures, timestamps, copies of the complaints, and in one of those PDFs, found a gold mine. The complaint that triggered my zoning violation was filed by Joyce, dated a week after the court stripped her of all rights to the land. Her name was still on the paperwork, signed in ink. She'd used an outdated permit number on purpose to slip the complaint through, and the county let it through. I called my lawyer. Blake was stunned. She's committing fraud again, he said. But this time, she's doing it through a network. You're not just dealing with Joyce. You're dealing with everyone she's paid or promised. We filed a motion to nullify every action taken against me since the court's ruling. But even as that was happening, the harassment escalated. I came home one night to find my cabin plans ripped to shreds on my porch. My truck had 2 tires slashed. Someone poured oil into my mailbox. I never saw anyone do it. No cameras, no evidence, but I knew who was behind it. The neighbors who used to wave at me now looked away. One even said, "You should have just let her keep it." It was a beautiful house. That's what they cared about, the look of it, prestige. The HOA was the illusion of order and had broken it, and they wanted revenge. But in the middle of that chaos, something changed. A letter arrived from an anonymous source. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper. It was an internal memo from Cedar Bluff's HOA leaked. It detailed a vote taken behind closed doors to monitor and restrict properties recently exempted from the HOA charter. And it named me first on the list. It was signed by the new president. But Joyce's initials were scribbled in the margins. That's when I knew this wasn't just legal anymore. It was war. I contacted the state attorney general's office. I packaged every memo, every violation, every fake citation. I wrote a 37-page report and included copies of the forged complaints. It was a long shot, but I was done playing defense. A month later, state investigators showed up at the HOA headquarters, unannounced. Joyce wasn't there, but she wasn't hiding either. She was running for county supervisor. That's right. After losing a multi-million-dollar property in court, after being exposed for fraud, she pivoted to politics. And somehow, people still supported her. She held fundraisers. Lawn signs popped up around town. Joyce Myers. Restore community standards. But I wasn't going to let her forget what she did. I showed up at one of her rallies quietly. In the back and handed out leaflets with copies of the court decision and the fraud documents. She saw me. Her expression didn't change, but her hands started shaking while she held the mic. The next day, my truck was keyed down both sides. Her war wasn't just legal now, it was personal. But that's what pushed me to set the final trap. Remember the clause I used in court? The one that saved my land? There was more to it. In the same settlement between my father and the county, there was a paragraph about public access rights. County had agreed to preserve a right-of-way trail that cut through the northern edge of the land. It was barely used, a hidden dirt path that nobody cared about. Until now. I filed a petition to designate the trail as a protected historical route. If approved, it would place permanent development restrictions on the surrounding land, including the HOA's expansion projects, and not just Cedar Bluffs. Every neighborhood connected to it. If the trail got protected status, it would freeze permits on 6 future subdivisions. Joyce's backers had been planning for over a decade. I had found the match that could burn their empire to the ground. They fought like hell to stop it. They held emergency town halls. They pressured local historical boards. They tried to discredit my research. Joyce even accused me publicly of fabricating the trail's significance. But I had pictures, old ones, me and my dad, walking it when I was a kid, with dates, county maps, letters from hikers, newspaper clippings. Even a photo of my grandfather building a wooden sign at the trailhead in 1972. The board Couldn't fight history. The state approved the designation. The trail was now protected under state law. And just like that, the HOA's blueprint for expansion was toast. Developers pulled out. Joyce lost half her donor base. Her campaign shriveled, and the board. They called an emergency meeting to propose a vote of no confidence in her. Leadership, the woman who tried to bury me under concrete and glass, had become a liability. She stepped down 2 weeks later, citing health reasons. But the truth was clear. I didn't just take back my land, I took back the future. They tried to build on my silence, and I did it one signature at a time. To anyone watching this who thinks their voice doesn't matter, let me tell you, it does. I was one man, with no money, no influence, no army, just a file cabinet full of my dad's papers, and a refusal to let them win. This story still isn't over. Because after the HOA crumbled, Joyce made one last move. A move so desperate, so reckless. Still can't believe it happened. She wasn't just angry anymore. She wanted me gone for good. What she did next almost landed her in prison. So don't. Stop now. Watch till the end, because this fight gets darker before it finds the light again. I used to think the worst thing someone could do to you was steal what's yours, but it's not. The worst thing is when they try to erase you completely, your name, your history, your dignity, like you never existed. That's what Joyce tried to do next. And this time, she didn't want my land. She wanted my life destroyed. I had already shut down her dream mansion. I had exposed her to the state. Her HOA expansion collapsed, her campaign died in disgrace. And she'd stepped down publicly citing health issues when everyone knew the real reason. I thought that was the end of her. But people like Joyce don't go away quietly. Retreat, and then they strike. I started noticing strange things again. First, it was the emails. Messages from realtors asking if I was still planning to sell the land, even though I'd never listed it. Then calls from random contractors saying they were told to resume work on the mansion. One guy even showed up with a bulldozer, claiming he had a signed contract from the developer. I laughed at first, felt like a prank, until someone tried to break into my shed. They didn't steal anything. I just left it wide open, tools scattered, a crowbar lying on the floor, like someone had been interrupted. I checked my outdoor camera. Footage was wiped. It got worse. 3 days later, I was driving to the property and saw black smoke curling over the hill. I floored the gas. My stomach dropped. My truck bounced down the dirt road. When I turned the corner, I saw fire licking up the old barn wall. That barn had been there for 70 years. It was the only original structure left. I grabbed the extinguisher and fought it like hell. By the time the fire department arrived, half the wall was charred, and the inside smelled like scorched pine. They told me it could have been electrical, but there was no wiring in that section of the barn. I knew. They knew. Someone had lit it on purpose, but proving arson. That's near impossible without video or eyewitnesses. Joyce never appeared, never called, never mentioned a thing, but I knew. And that's when the fear set in. Real fear, not anger, not grief, but the kind of fear that keeps you awake at night wondering just how far someone's willing to go when they have nothing left. To lose, I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I kept a shotgun by my bed. And every creak of the floorboard felt like a threat. I had gone from being a landowner fighting for justice to a man defending his life. My lawyer Blake urged me to move out of the cabin for a while. Let it cool off, he said. Stay in town. Give her time to spiral. She's unraveling. I didn't want to leave, but I listened. I rented a small place in town, about 15 minutes away. But even there, followed me. I started getting strange letters, no return address, no signature, just cut out words from magazines glued onto paper. You don't belong here. Some things are better left buried. You should have walked away. Joyce had crossed the line. She wasn't. Just angry. She was obsessed. I filed police reports. I gave them the letters, the contractor calls, the attempted break-in. But without a name or witness, it was all just suspicion until the night she showed up. It was 1:12 a.m. I remember the time because I looked at the clock when I heard the knock on the door. One knock, then silence. More than a few hours a night, in weeks. I sat up, heart pounding. Another knock. Slow, heavy, not rushed, just deliberate. I grabbed the shotgun and crept to the door. No one was there. I scanned the yard. Nothing. But then I saw it. Tucked into the crack between the door frame and the siding. A photograph. It was a picture of me standing outside the property a few days earlier. Taken from a distance, I was looking away. My face was slightly turned. I didn't even know it had been taken. On the back of the photo, written in red ink, "You took everything. Let's see how you live with it." I don't remember breathing. I don't remember going back inside. All I remember is calling Blake at 1:18 a.m. and whispering, "She's watching me." Blake drove to me that night. We didn't speak much, just sat in the kitchen with the lights off, drinking bad coffee while the shotgun stayed between us on the table. The next morning, he made the call to a federal contact. Blake had an old friend at the FBI. He explained the land battle, the arson, the harassment, the stalking, the photos, the fire. Everything. The agency didn't laugh. They opened an investigation, and within a week, Joyce was under surveillance. They dug into her phone records, her HOA emails, her deleted campaign communications. And what they found was darker than I ever imagined. Joyce had created a fake realty company. On paper, it looked like a firm offering land acquisitions and development contracts. But in reality, it was a shell used to approach buyers under my name, trying to sell parcels of my land illegally under forged documents. Her goal was simple, to make it look like I had sold it and then accuse me of fraud to the county, but it went deeper. She had paid a private investigator off, the books to follow me, to take photos, to watch who I met with, to find vulnerabilities, and she'd written a journal. They found it in her office during a subpoena search. A leather-bound book. Inside were months of notes, all about me, my routine, my family, my habits. She even wrote about what kind of dog I had as a kid. Obsessed wasn't the word. It was chilling. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying. To ruin me, they arrested her on charges of criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, stalking, and attempted identity theft. She was booked. Mugshot and all. The story hit the local papers. Then the state media. Then the national news. Former HOA president indicted for targeting landowner in escalating harassment case. She tried to play the victim, claiming she was mentally unwell, that she was grieving the loss of her dream. But the evidence was overwhelming. It didn't go to trial. She accepted a plea deal, 5 years probation, a lifetime restriction from managing any HOA or holding public office, and mandatory psychiatric treatment. I never saw her again after that, but I kept the journal, every page of it, not because I wanted to relive the nightmare, but because I needed to remember what it cost to protect what was mine. People think land is just dirt and trees, but they don't understand what it carries. Every stone, every trail, every broken fence post told a story. My grandfather planted trees there with his bare hands. My father built the barn that sheltered our tools and memories, and I was ready to lose everything to protect it. I nearly did, but I didn't, and neither should you. If you're watching this and someone is trying to silence you, whether it's an HOA, a neighbor, a company, or even someone you trusted, don't let them. Don't walk away from your truth. Don't shrink in the face of power. You're stronger than you know. Stay with me for the final part of this story, because after all the battles, all the losses, all the scars, what came next was something I never expected. A letter. And it changed everything. Watch till the end, because sometimes the most powerful victories come when you least expect them. The dust had finally settled. Joyce was gone. Her face no longer appeared on HOA websites or campaign posters. The mansion she tried to build was long demolished, and the land had healed, scar by scar. I thought the silence would bring peace, that once the war ended, I'd feel relief. But peace doesn't come just because the noise stops. Sometimes, peace comes after you confront the deepest parts of yourself. And for me, that moment came in the form of a letter, It arrived with no warning, no return address, just my name, handwritten, in neat cursive, on a cream-colored envelope. I almost tossed it, thinking it was another bill or legal notice, but something about it felt different. Inside was a single-page note. I never wanted it to go that far. I just wanted to be seen. "I'm sorry, Jay." I stared at it for minutes, frozen. Joyce. She had written me from the psychiatric facility. The investigation was over, the damage done, and yet here she was, writing a letter that didn't make excuses. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't justify what she did. It was just quiet sorrow. And you know what? I felt something. I never expected to feel pity, not forgiveness, not friendship, but a kind of sad understanding that somewhere deep inside her war, she had been broken too. She just chose to break others instead of healing herself. But this wasn't her story anymore, it was mine, and I had one more thing to do. A few weeks later, I returned to the land, all 20 acres of it. The sun was coming up, casting golden light through the pine trees that had grown back in the years since the demolition. I brought a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, just like my dad used to. I sat in the middle of the clearing where the mansion once stood, and I closed my eyes. It was quiet now. No saws, no shouting, no legal threats or construction noise. Just wind and birds and memory. I remembered being a boy, digging holes with my dad, pretending we were building a castle. I remembered my mom laying out a blanket for lunch on the hill. I remembered my grandfather hammering nails with thick, shaking hands, still proud even as time caught up to him. This land held all of that, and now it held me, not as a fighter, not as a victim, as a survivor. Over the next few months, I built what I originally set out to build. Not a mansion, not a monument, just a small 2-bedroom cabin. Wooden, simple, peaceful. There's no driveway sign, no fence, no gate, no security cameras, just one path leading to the porch and a single light that stays on at night. Like a quiet invitation to the ghosts of the people I loved. People started to talk again. The neighbors who once ignored me now wave when they drive by. A few even apologized. Said they didn't know the full story. Said they were scared to speak up back then. I nodded. I didn't blame them. It's hard to stand up to a monster when it looks like it runs the town. But monsters fall. And when they do, people start remembering who they are. The county sent me a letter too. An official apology for processing fake HOA paperwork. They offered restitution. I didn't take it. I didn't want their money. I wanted change, so I asked for something else. I requested the county create a public awareness campaign, educating landowners about HOA overreach, property rights, and how to legally protect themselves. They agreed. A brochure now gets handed out at every title transfer office in the state, and at the top of it is a single sentence in bold. You have more rights than you think. It was small, but it mattered, and that's the thing people forget about justice. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's slow, quiet, uncelebrated, but it's real, and it lasts. A year after everything ended, I was invited to speak at a local community rights event. I almost said no. I'm not good with crowds. I'm not a lawyer or a politician. I'm just a guy who refused to back down. But I showed up, and I told my story. When I was done, a woman came up to me in tears. She said her father had lost his land to a developer under false HOA pressure and died believing he was wrong. She hugged me like I'd brought him justice. That was the moment. I realized something bigger than my fight had happened here. This wasn't just about land, it was about truth, legacy, dignity, and how easily those things are taken. If you're not willing to stand up and scream, this is mine. If you're still watching this, let me say something to you now. From one human being to another, I don't care how small your voice is, how big their name is, how many lawyers, dollars, or fake votes they throw at you, you matter. Your truth matters. And if they try to take it, you fight. Even if your hands shake, even if your knees buckle, even if you cry alone in the dark some nights. Thinking you've lost? You haven't? because I didn't. And I was just one man with a box of dusty papers and a story no one wanted to hear. Until I made them listen. So if you're up against someone like Joyce Ann, HOA, a boss, a neighbor, anyone who thinks they're above the rules, don't run. Get ready. Because your land, your voice, your life, it's worth a fight. And believe me, it's a fight you can win. Thank you for watching my story. Please, if this moved, you'd share it. Someone out there right now is staring at a red notice on their door, thinking they're alone. They're not. Them know that, and if you ever see a quiet plot of land with a small cabin, a garden, and a hand-carved bench under a pine tree, feel free to sit. You're welcome there, because the land we defend always has room for one more soul who refuses to be erased.